And now, to introduce the keynote speaker for PIERS 2023, may I hand over the floor to the Chair Professor of Department of Economics and Statistics, University of Peradeniya, Professor Dileni Gunewardena.
Distinguished members of the head table, distinguished invitees, colleagues, students, and friends. I'm extremely pleased to be able to introduce our keynote speaker today. And before I start, I just want to say something to Professor Terence Majudit, Acting Vice Chancellor. Sir, I'm sure that Dr. Wijewardena has 10 fingers like the rest of us. But of all of us here, I think he's the person that can rest assured that when he was pointing fingers, there may have been fingers pointing back towards him, but really he has maybe the least of all of us to consider in that respect. And let me, through his bio, show you what I mean. Dr. Wijewardena is at present President of the Business Management School, BMS, a government-approved non-state sector university in Sri Lanka. He has held this position since 2010. We best know him in his previous capacity as a central bank economist, a position he occupied for nearly 40 years before retiring from the bank in 2009 as deputy governor. Let me pause here to speculate that had Dr. Wijewardena not left the bank in 2009, and had he stayed and gone on to hold the highest position of that institution, the trajectory of Sri Lanka's economic fortunes might have been quite different. But unfortunately, that is the road that was not taken. His biography reveals several contributions he has made while he was at the central bank, which may not be that well known to this audience, and I will take the time to mention them, especially as they are examples of institutional building. From 2000 to 2008, when he was the chairman of Sri Lanka Accounting and Auditing Standards Monitoring Board, he initiated the setting up of Sri Lanka's auditing and accounting standards. As the chairman of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka during 2000 to 2009, he led the team that successfully negotiated with the Chartered Institute of Bankers UK for the accreditation of its qualification. He led the team that established the Credit Information Bureau of Sri Lanka as its founder and general manager in 1990. He also steered the central bank modernization project, which introduced modern technology to the bank while creating a lean and efficient organization. The technological innovations introduced to the bank consisted of the establishment of a modern payment system called the real-time gross settlement, automation of the general ledger of the bank, and modernization of public debt management by setting up the central depository to record scriptless government securities. Dr. Wijewardena also still plays an active teaching role. He is an adjunct faculty at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand and is a visiting lecturer to the University of Wijewardena and the Postgraduate Institute of Management. He also serves on the faculty study boards of both the Sabaragama University and the Postgraduate Institute of Management. He has served on the graduate faculty board of the University of Wijewardena and on the council of the University of Colombo. Dr. Wijewardena has a first-class honors degree in public administration from the University of Wijewardena, as well as a postgraduate diploma in applied social statistics from the same university. He has a Master of Science in Economics from the University of York, the Doctor of Business Administration from California Metropolitan University, and a further DPA in Banking and Finance from European International University, Paris. For the lifetime contribution he has made to economics and economic policy making, he has been awarded the Doctor of Civil Law, HC, by Northumbria University, UK. Dr. Wijewardena describes himself as a writer, a public speaker, an economic analyst, an educationist. I think we are all familiar with his weekly column on economic and related issues called My View, Economics Matters, which appears every Monday in the Daily FT. If I had to describe him in one sentence, in these days where such a thing is rare, I would say he is someone who is not afraid to speak truth to power. Dr. Wijewardena, over to you.
Thanks, Chair Professor Dileni Gunewardena, for the very generous and kind introduction. Professor Gunewardena and myself had been association for, I think, for many years. So therefore, she is not a stranger to me, nor am I a stranger to her. Deputy Vice Chancellor and other dignitaries at the head table, visiting faculty from Transilvania University of Brasov in Romania, faculty, students, distinguished invitees, and ladies and gentlemen. It is always a pleasure, privilege, and honor to visit the University of Peradeniya. Even though I was not fortunate to study here, I have been tutored at the central bank by those governors and also the directors of economic research who had been produced by the University of Peradeniya. So therefore, I can very legitimately say that I am one of you. I am not a stranger here. In fact, the first director of economic research of the central bank, when it was started in 1950, was loaned to central bank by the University of Ceylon. Professor Dasgupta became the first director of economic research. At that time, there were two contenders, both of whom were professors here, Professor B.R. Shenoy and Professor Dasgupta, but central bank chose for Professor Dasgupta, and Professor B.R. Shenoy joined the Reserve Bank of India as an economic advisor. Since then, I think almost all the governors of the central bank, deputy governors of the central bank, directors of economic research of the central bank, and all other senior officers of the central bank had been produced by Peradeniya University. So therefore, you have a very close collaboration with the central bank, and I am therefore privileged to be present here at the 9th Symposium organized by the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences on the economic crisis which Sri Lanka is facing today. And the Deputy Vice Chancellor was very critical of economists for failing to provide correct advice to the policymakers. Had the economists had done their job properly, it implied that we could have averted the present crisis. But if you have watched the media over the last 3 to 4 year time period, I have done it. Every week I find an academic from University of Peradeniya appearing on TV explaining to us why we have gone wrong, what should be done, and so forth. Unfortunately for Sri Lanka, their wise counsel had never been heard by the people to whom it might matter. So we are in a great difficulty today, not because of anything, because of this gap between the academics and policymakers. When some of the most disastrous economic policies were taken by the government, not only the previous government of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but also the governments before that. It was the academics from Peradeniya University who came forward and who actually directed us in the correct path. But what happened was, we were not actually humble enough or sincere enough to listen to their voices. So that's why we are here. So the title of today's, I think the theme of today's symposium is the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, causes, consequences, and the way forward. And many of the academics who will address you will talk about the causes and consequences. I have therefore chosen for my keynote address the way forward. The way forward strategy mainly consists of, in the short to medium term, Sri Lanka would get a bailout package from the International Monetary Fund and stabilize its macroeconomy. But to resolve the chronic and acute economic crisis in the country, Sri Lanka is planning to become a rich country by year 2048. This has been announced by President Ranil Wickremesinghe when he addressed the nation, when he addressed parliamentarians, and also on many public fora he had addressed. The year 2048 has been chosen by Sri Lanka because that is the year in which Sri Lanka would celebrate the centenary of its independence from Britain. It's ironical that when the British left us, we were a relatively rich country. But after 100 years, now we are going to make Sri Lanka again a rich country. So it's an irony that we are facing. 2 weeks before President Ranil Wickremesinghe made this pronouncement, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, also announced that his government will take action to make India a rich country by 2047, 1 year before Sri Lanka. Why 1 year before Sri Lanka? Because India got independence in 1947, Sri Lanka 1948. So it appears that both India and Sri Lanka are walking along the same line. India first and Sri Lanka following, which is not a bad thing, because when there is somebody who sets an example for us to follow, I don't think there's nothing wrong in Sri Lanka to do so. But let us hope India will become a rich country by 1947, and Sri Lanka also will become a rich country by 2048. So this is the target of Sri Lanka today, because the main reason is, even though the worst of the economic crisis is no longer here, we are still not out of the woods. We are still in the crisis. The crisis is not over yet. And all of a sudden, something might trigger off to push us back to where we were in the middle of 2022. So in order to avoid that, Ranil Wickremesinghe government wants to first stabilize the macroeconomy by getting funding from the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, ADB, and all the friendly nations, India, Japan, China, UK, USA, Australia. You mention it, and they are there to support us. And they would provide temporary emergency relief to Sri Lanka so that Sri Lanka can overcome the present economic crisis involving the foreign exchange crisis, the monetary crisis, and the fiscal sector crisis. And you will hear from various experts on these areas, the nature of these crises and how the crisis occurred and so forth. I will just take you through some of the challenges that we might face in our march towards 2048 target. Because 2048 is the year in which we'll become a rich country. And the unfortunately for us, the President Ranil Wickremesinghe never disclosed the detailed strategy that his government would be following to make us a rich country in 2048. Instead, what he said was, while addressing the nation, he said that he's going to assemble the leaders in the private sector, bureaucracy, and the cabinet in a lab, in a policy lab, to be convened by him towards the end of the second quarter, which is now over. And those guinea pigs in the policy lab are supposed to come out with a policy strategy which Sri Lanka should follow during the next 25 years or so to make Sri Lanka a rich country. And that particular report is to be out according to his timeline by the end of this quarter, by end of September. But since the policy lab has not been convened, I think it might take a little longer to get this report. Just to provide some advice to those who are to be assembled there, he had pronounced two particular announcements. One is that he said he is following what is known as the social market economy ideology during his time period. Now, this is not new to Sri Lanka, because when he became the Prime Minister in 2015 also, he pronounced that his government would follow the ideology of social market economy, but it was never implemented. I can recall I was invited to University of Peradeniya immediately after he made the pronouncement. I delivered a long speech on social market economy as well as the implications involving that. Social market economy is an economic policy ideology adopted by the post-war Germany, which we call the West Germany at that time, to avoid the following of both the extreme capitalism and extreme socialism. Because the Germans had already faced the intricacies of following all these political ideologies, and as you are well aware, the German was subject to hyperinflation immediately after the First World War. The inflation rate running over 1,000,000% per annum, and therefore they didn't want to follow either the extreme capitalism or extreme socialism. Instead, they followed the middle path. So what is meant by the social market economy is, you believe in the role of the private sector. The private sector is still the engine of growth, but the government also has a role to play. So that role is simply to direct the economy in the correct path by taking into account the vulnerable groups which would become at disadvantage as a result of following the type of capitalist economic policies. Germany was successful in adopting this particular ideology and coming out of the destruction of the Second World War within a matter of about 5 to 6 years. And today it is one of the leading global economies. Unfortunately for Sri Lanka, even though we pronounced in 2015 that we would be following it, there was no any attempt at describing or explaining what it is. Because I can recall, because I am lecturing at the Postgraduate Institute of Management, there was a seminar attended by the ministry secretaries and the additional secretaries, where I had to introduce this particular social market economy philosophy to them. I asked the question, did they read anything about the social market economy? Except one, none of them had read it. Even the person who had read it, because he had anticipated that it could be a probable question in the efficiency by examination, so therefore he had studied. None of them. So the failure of the first Ranil Wickremesinghe government in implementing the social market economy ideology was that it was just in the heads of the policymakers. It had not been dispersed or communicated to the people to whom it matters, the bureaucrats, the politicians, the members of his own party, the general public, and so forth. We are actually facing the same threat this time also. Social market economy as the policy ideology of the new government has been pronounced, but the parliamentarians who are supporting President Ranil Wickremesinghe in parliament, they believe in something else. The way that they speak, the way that they criticize the present government's policies, you will find that they are in the opposite, completely in the opposite camp. Even the more opposite than the opposition members. So it has not been communicated to them well. But if we look at the type of policies which President Ranil Wickremesinghe has pronounced so far, I find that they are not different from the neoliberal economic policies which had been prescribed to us by the trio in Washington, the World Bank, the IMF, and the US Treasury, and we are simply following them. In fact, whatever the policy measures being advocated by the International Monetary Fund are based on this neoliberal economic policy. So we are presenting to the members of the public that we are following the social market economy policy. But at the same time, we are following a completely opposite policy package involving what is now known as the neoliberal economic policies, and many of the academics have already contested the validity of the neoliberal economic policies as policy guideline for a country to come out of a crisis. Then President Ranil Wickremesinghe has said that in his government, there are four basic pillars that would actually guide the government in the future. Pillar number one was that he wanted to discipline the government budget. The disciplining means we have already gone out of control in the government budget. The expenditures have ballooned while the revenues have actually lagged behind the expenditures. Huge budget deficit. So discipline the budget means that we have to cut the expenditure and also we have to increase the revenue. But unfortunately for us, the current policy package being followed by us on the recommendation of the International Monetary Fund is based on what is known as the revenue-based fiscal consolidation. So what is meant by this revenue-based fiscal consolidation is that we try to resolve the fiscal crisis by increasing the revenue of the government rather than trying to curtail the expenditure side of the government. Now, this is very visible in the budget of 2023. When the budget of 2023 was announced, presented by President Ranil Wickremesinghe in Parliament, the country's revenue was targeted to be increased from around 2 trillion rupees to 3.4 trillion rupees. A massive increase. And subsequently, when Sri Lanka went for the International Monetary Fund's bailout package, the IMF had scaled down the revenue target to 3.2 trillion Sri Lanka rupees. So from 3.4 to 3.2. So we were concerned only about the increase in the revenues. That is why we have this big problem with the university academic, because we have been taxed very high. They are in the street. Most of them are leaving the country. because we are only concerned about the revenue target and not the expenditure target. The expenditure target is not known to us as ordinary citizens, because what is presented to us in the budget is called the net position of the budget. Now, what is being read in Parliament is the net position. What is being debated by government, by the parliamentarians, is the net position of the budget. What is being approved by the parliamentary is the net position. But the gross position is something else. The gross position is hidden. Immediately after the approval of the main budget, there is another approval being made by the parliamentarians in Sri Lanka called the approval of the Appropriation Act. Appropriation Act is similar to, and if those who have done accounting would know, to the cash flow of the government, cash inflow and the cash outflow. So in the cash outflow, how we convert the gross expenditure of the government to the next expenditure is, net expenditure is that whenever there is a maturity of any public debt during that particular time period, it is always assumed that the government is in a position to reissue it and refinance it. So therefore, that is taken out. So the budget deficit presented to us by the central bank in its annual report, by the Ministry of Finance in its annual report, and the budget deficit that we discuss in the universities is this net position. But what matters to the government is not the net position, but the gross position, the total expenditure of the government, which is actually passed in a hurry by parliamentarians immediately after they pass the main budget in Parliament. There you have the gross expenditure. Now, the gross expenditure of Sri Lanka government for 2020, now net expenditure is some 8.4 trillion rupees. Gross expenditure is 14 trillion rupees. Take into account the public debt that would mature during the year and the interest that has to be paid on that particular public debt during the year. Now, if you look at the revenue performance of the government so far during the first 6 months, we are supposed to generate at least 1.6 trillion during the first 6 months. But all the three revenue generation agencies, the Inland Revenue, Customs, and the Excise Department, have so far been able to generate only about 70% of that. So in the second half, we have to get 1.6 trillion plus what has been missing during the first half. So my estimate is that most probably Sri Lanka would end up year 2023 with the revenue mobilization of some 2.8 trillion, not the 3. So this is the massive challenge which President Ranil would face in the next 6 months' time. Though disciplining the budget is one of the pillars, unless we cut down the government expenditure drastically and repurpose that expenditure as the World Bank has done, as Mr. Asela Disanayak had explained to us, we are not in a position to discipline the budget. Budget is completely out of our control today. The second one is the promotion of investments. Investment promotion is necessary because Sri Lanka, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, Sri Lanka had not got that much of foreign direct investment to the country because of the various structural problems that we are facing. Domestic investments also didn't come forward because of the tax treatments that we had, anomalous tax treatment that we had adopted during the period. So what is happening is that those who have done economics will know, for us to generate an economic growth of 7% per annum based on the current efficient use of the capital in the country, we need to have an investment of about 35%. But the maximum investment that we got was about 26%. There was a massive savings investment gap. And that gap was financed by borrowing from the rest of the world, specifically from the commercial markets. Now the present problem is a different type. One is that we can no longer rely on the type of investment that we had made in the past. Because what is necessary for Sri Lanka to come out of the present economic crisis is to change the entire structure of Sri Lanka's export sector and the structure of Sri Lanka's economy. We had been concentrating on the tea, rubber and coconuts, the tree sector, apparel sector, and some of the minor agricultural crops as exports. And all these are now, we have come to the saturated point. We cannot move any further to expand the Sri Lanka's economy through these three sectors. So we have to go for new ones. So new ones involves today the conversion of Sri Lanka's economy by using modern technology so that you would be able to produce to the rest of the world the high-tech products. So far, if you look at our merchandise exports, our high-tech products are about, say, 1% of our total export revenue. But if you want to become a country worth by year 2048, or even to realize the targets of the fourth industrial revolution, which is now undergoing with the world, we must have at least 40% of our exports in the form of high-tech products. So the new investment should be those areas. I will look at the details of the consequences and the implications and so challenges of changing to that. Third pillar is the providing social security to people who are not in a position to gain the maximum benefit out of the current economic policy reforms. For that purpose, we have already changed from the Samurdhi scheme to assessment scheme. And still, since the money has not been allocated by the Treasury to make the payments, and Treasury cannot do that because Treasury doesn't have any money. So they have lots of problems in the social security provision there. The fourth pillar that he had suggested to the people in the lab is the reform of the state-owned enterprises. So those are the four pillars. Now, people who are to be assembled into this lab, policy lab, will have to discuss critically the purpose of the social market economy, the four pillars which the government is following, and then come out with a policy strategy to take us to richness by 2048. And the policy lab is also not something that has come out of the blue sky. It is coming from the growth lab of the Center for International Development of the Harvard University in USA. They are the Professor Ricardo Hausmann, who came to Sri Lanka also several times. He's the head of the policy lab there, growth lab there. They are the people who provide the technical assistance to countries who want to follow this. Naturally, President Ranil Wickremesinghe has great faith in the CID, not the Criminal Investigation Department, the Center for International Development of the Harvard University, because he is one of the alumni of the CID. So therefore, he has a great faith in that. I hope that the people who are to be assembled in the policy lab, probably towards the next 1 to 2 months time period, would be guided by the economists coming from the growth lab of the Harvard University. There's nothing wrong in that. I hope that it will provide the necessary technical know-how to us. But what matters to us is there are certain implications that we have to take into account. Now, for us to gain additional or accelerate economic growth, all of you who have done growth economics will know we are using physical capital, human capital, and technology in a combination to accelerate economic growth. Now, physical capital is not being produced by Sri Lanka. We have to get it from outside. The countries like Romania will have to help us to get the physical capital. Human capital, even though we think that we had been successful in producing human capital in this country, we have not been able to produce the required type of human capital today. Even Deputy Vice Chancellor referred to the fact that we are providing degrees to graduates, and those graduates, immediately after they get the degree, they stand at the Lifton circus and they demand a government job. That is because we have just developed human capital, but not the creative capital. What is needed? The creative capital. So creative capital is the development of the human intellect in such a way that that intellect would be able to break the boundaries that are being set for us by the prevailing social, cultural, economic, and political constraints. We must be able to challenge everything. And those graduates who are able to do that, they would be able to become creative once they become graduates. Then we have two issues now. One issue is that our population is aging. Now, presently, the average medium age of a Sri Lankan is some 34 years compared to 27 years in India. We are aging. Then our population will start falling. So by 2048, as a result, the projected median age of a Sri Lankan is some 45 years, very old people. So we are going to take Sri Lanka to economic prosperity, richness, with these old people like me. Whereas the young people are leaving the country. Why young people are leaving the country, that's a different issue. But in my view, there's nothing wrong in their leaving the country, because those people who leave the country today, and if we are successful in getting them, which is called the migration of the professionals. The university professors are leaving in large numbers because according to University Grant Commission chairman who testified before the COP, Committee on Public Enterprise in Parliament, he said during the last 3-year period, some 1,000 university grant lecturers have left the university system, according to him. Large number. Similar number, about say 200 people have left the central bank, another 200 bank of Ceylon, about 800 doctors from the healthcare system. People are leaving. But there's nothing wrong in leaving them as long as we are in a position to generate what is known as the reverse migration. Let them leave today. After they leave Sri Lanka today, let them gain experience. Let them accumulate capital. Let them make market networks, which we call the social capital, and return to Sri Lanka and take us towards this richness by year 2048. This is exactly what is being done in Vietnam today, because you may remember in 1970s, the Vietnamese people left that country in boats. They were known as the boat people, boat refugees. They settled themselves in Australia and New Zealand, but they are now returning to Vietnam with capital, experience, entrepreneurship, and the market networks, connections. So that's why Vietnam has been more successful than Sri Lanka, even though Vietnam started its growth journey many years after us. Same thing is happening in India also. Now, Indian software engineers were employed in UK, Israel, Ireland, USA, Canada, Australia, Germany, France. They are returning in large numbers, and they have created what is now known as the Silicon Valley in Bangalore. And India has become, now remember, India started using computers many years after Sri Lanka. Immediately after Sri Lankan economy was opened in 1977, we had access to computers. In fact, we had played the game much more efficiently and much more effectively than India. Because when I went to India in 1978, they had not seen a credit card, and they were astonished to see my using a credit card, but they had not seen it. But today, we have to learn from them how we should, digitize our identity cards. That's how the things have happened. That is because the people who had left that country earlier, they had returned. So therefore, don't take the people who are leaving the country as a curse. I have seen, even my good friend, chairman of the University Grant Commission says, we must, tax them. Before they leave, we will have to collect the money that the government has spent on them as free education. Again, another myth. That is because the myth has been, I think, spread by many people who have an interest in this particular subject, that the students in Sri Lanka are being paid by the taxpayers without bothering to define who are the taxpayers. That is because they think the taxpayers are the people who pay direct taxes or indirect taxes. In other words, if you take the government budget, the money that I refer to, 3.2 trillion being raised by the government for 2023, many think that those are the taxpayers. No. 200 years before, early 19th century, English economist David Ricardo, he actually resolved this problem forever for us. He said, there's no difference between the tax burden and the debt burden. What it means is that, you have a government expenditure, you finance it by raising taxes. So there's a burden. Immediately, there's a burden falling on you. Then the government can finance itself by borrowing from the market by issuing bonds, the treasury bonds or treasury bills, as in the case of Sri Lanka. David Ricardo very correctly pointed out the treasury bonds and bills the government issues today are actually future tax obligations. The people in the future will have to pay taxes. So therefore, we have two types of taxpayers now. The taxpayers who are paying taxes today and the taxpayers who are paying taxes tomorrow. Then there's a third category which was not there during the time of David Ricardo, that's the printing of money by the government through the central bank. Now, this was brought into our analysis by Robert Barrow of Harvard University. Therefore, it is now called the Ricardian-Barrow equivalence, the new theory. He said that when the government prints money by using the central bank, we actually impose an inflation tax on people. So there are types of taxpayers that we have is that we have the current taxpayers, the future taxpayers, and the inflation taxpayers. Who are the inflation taxpayers? All of us who are present. Now, for example, I have calculated because the Colombo Consumer Price Index now, day before yesterday, I think the Census Department released the latest data saying that the inflation rate has come down from 6% to 4%. So we were very happy. Actually, central banks should be happy, not the consumers like us. This particular time series was released by the Census Department with 100 as the index value in January 2021. End of August, the index value has gone up to 190. Now, my pension, if I look at it from that point of view, has fallen from January 2021 to the 100 rupee pension to some 52 rupees. So there is an inflation tax of 48 rupees I have paid. So similarly, all these, things will have to be taken into account, and therefore nobody can say that the students have got free education. The students have financed. Instead, you have to say students have financed themselves, their education, by paying current taxes, by paying future taxes, and by paying a tax called the inflation tax. So therefore, there's nothing wrong. And if someone is trying to collect the cost of the education from them at the airport, I think we have to teach him economics anew. That's the short and the long story that I had to see. So we have therefore this the demographic problem which is facing us very seriously. We have an aging population. We have a skillless population, which we call we have a population which is not creative. We have human capital, but we don't have creative human capital. So this is what the Ranil Wickremesinghe government will have to address now. We have the best universities in the country. 16 universities plus another new universities to be set up. So we'll have 17 universities very soon. And if you look at the academic credentials of the staff there, they have got their postgraduate degrees from the best universities in the world. Then we have the research institutions like the Industrial Technology Institute, ITI, Tea Research Institute, Rubber Research Institute, Coconut Research Institute, the Department of Agriculture. If you look at the credentials of the researchers there, they also have got the best, postgraduate degrees from the best universities in the world. So we have a total research output there. So what we should do is we have to assemble this research collection to produce creative capital for Sri Lanka, so that let the people who leave the country leave. In fact, they say that when somebody leaves, it is good for the person who remains back, because when most of my seniors left the central bank, actually it was good for me. I became the deputy governor. Otherwise, I wouldn't have become the deputy governor. So the remaining people will get a higher salary and they get a better opportunity. But what we should do is we'll have to train them into being this creative capital that would help Sri Lanka to take Sri Lanka to richness by year 2040. Now, instead, what is being done is some piecemeal solution. Now, you would have heard President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who had come to Kandy last week, announcing to, I think, Mahamaya College, I think Dileni Gunewardena's, Mahamaya, they saying that he will give 10 million rupees to each college so that they can play in the share market. And after 5 years, those who are most successful in the game will be given a scholarship to go to Singapore and learn more about the share market. Now, share market is not the type of thing that we have to develop in Sri Lanka to convert our human capital to creative capital. Instead, we'll have to get the prevailing universities. And there again, we have missed the bus now. We set up 2 faculties of technology, one at the University of Wijewardena, the other one at the University of Colombo. They were to set up their faculties at the tech city in Pitipana and Homagama. The objective was that most of the leading private sector companies will come and set up their businesses there, so that the 2 faculties will provide the necessary research and the inventive capacity to those private businesses so that they can commercialize those products. Unfortunately, what happened was only one of the companies that had promised to set up there, they have set up their factory, which is an associate of the Hemas group called the J.L. Morrison and Sons, the pharmaceutical company. They are also now thinking of moving out from that particular location because there is no roadway to reach Pitipana. I mean, if you go to Pitipana today, you will find the most hazardous road. Now, many think that coming from Colombo to Kandy is the most hazardous. But if you go from Homagama to Pitipana, you will find the most hazardous road that you will have. And the universities have to, engage buses, private buses to transport students, because there's no private bus service there. So that particular model has now been completely ignored, mainly because the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government, by a single stroke of pen, they scrapped the entire project. Tech city in Pitipana. Now I have recommended to Ranil Wickremesinghe, start it immediately. You have to start it immediately, because that is how you will convert the existing human capital to creative capital, so that we will be able to overcome the human resource problem that we are facing today, aging of the population and the lack of the required human skills to take us to richness. Then we have the investment problem here. In the case of investment, the most important thing for Sri Lanka, as I have already mentioned, we cannot rely anymore on tree, rubber, coconut and apparel sector. The apparel sector, we already have lost it, because why apparel sector was located in countries like us was that, we had cheap labor there. And the labor cost in the countries where the markets are located, like US, the North America and Europe and Japan and Australia, they were very high. And therefore, they were located here. And that was the attraction for the companies to set up the apparel sector in Sri Lanka. And today what is happening is, because of these new advancements in technology, artificial intelligence, robot technology, then the machine learning, that particular disadvantage which those countries had is no more there. You can actually automate the garment production. So instead of, earlier location was called offshoring. Now what is happening is we are onshoring the same factories in USA, UK, Portugal, Romania, and all those countries. Because those countries are in a position, even though the labor charges are higher, they can automate the production of apparels there. So we are losing that market again because of the relocation. Second one is we are losing to countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Vietnam, whose labor, also Bangladesh, labor charges are lower, plus their labor is more efficient than the labor in Sri Lanka. Because some of the mistake that we make normally is that when we calculate the labor productivity, we look at the wages per day, per worker. That's not the proper one. We have to measure it, the output per day per worker. In Sri Lanka, wage per day per worker is low, about $100 per month. In China, the output per day per worker is 3 times the output of a Sri Lankan worker. So we are losing that market. So we have to necessarily now change our production model. And that requires us to introduce high technology to our production. High technology comes from the universities, the faculties of technology that we have set up. And these people will have to come up with the new high technology. And what happens is that instead of trying to produce one commodity in a country, we'll have to produce only one part of that commodity. Because today, the production model is known as the production sharing networks. We produce only one item. And that item is exported in large volume to another country which would assemble it. And then we are also part of that. For example, the iPhone 7, which is assembled in a factory in Foxconn in China, there are 47 countries that are supplying the components to iPhone 7. So it's a joint work by all these countries. In Sri Lanka also, instead of trying to, manufacture motor car, manufacture an aeroplane in Sri Lanka, what we should do is we have to produce one component, increase its volume, gain out of the volume increase, and send it to another country for assembling as a final product. There are already 2 such companies in Sri Lanka about which we can be proud of. I think you may be aware. One is called Lanka Harness, located at Biyagama. Lanka Harness, and you may be surprised to hear, is the company that supplies the sensors for airbags for all the automobiles in the world. Romania, all the countries in the world, we supply the sensors. China, Japan, India, Europe, USA, Canada, all the countries. One company. And it has become now a $400 export company today, which is a very high amount. And they are expanding. Second one is at Tulhiriya. we have mass fabrics. Mass fabrics is producing the canvas for the Nike shoes and supplying it to a factory in Vietnam, which will assemble the Nike shoes and supply to Sri Lanka, Romania, India, all the other countries. So we have only two. Two is not enough. The economists say we should have a critical mass. So what is a critical mass? Critical mass is the number that is necessary to make a change. We should have the technology students in a critical mass. We should have a creative capital in a critical mass. So two companies are not sufficient. So what we have to do is we have to promote as many companies as possible, maybe as startup companies or even the prevailing existing companies, to concentrate on the production of one high-tech item and supply it to other countries and enjoy the benefits of what is known as this production sharing networks. And that is what we should do to make Sri Lanka a rich country. And I hope this message is loud enough for the people who are to be assembled in the growth lab to hear. Because I am writing about it in my weekly column, and therefore they must learn about it. Because rather than trying to produce one particular output in Sri Lanka. Now, for example, the Chandrayaan-3, which landed on the moon by India recently, and many thought that it's an Indian product. No, 80% has come from outside. Only 20% has been manufactured in India. 80% has come from outside. France, the high-tech countries like France, Germany, Japan, Australia, all those countries. So India is wise enough to do that. Let Sri Lanka also gain the same wisdom, because Sri Lanka is following India to gain this particular wisdom today. So what we must do is, our universities will have to concentrate on new inventions. What we mean by new inventions is a new product or new management system by engineers or scientists, and make it known to the market. And once it is known, the entrepreneurs will have to pick it up and commercially produce it and export to other countries. So the lab people will have to now look at two things. One is the universities will have to be given additional funding immediately to produce, to come up with new inventions. You must have a competition not among the schools where they play the game in the share market in the best way. You must have a competition in schools where they come up with new inventions, universities with new inventions. Let Peradeniya University compete with University of Srijawardena and University of Colombo, which also have set up faculties for technology today. Let them compete and come up with inventions. But the inventions alone will not produce anything else unless it is commercially produced. This is not my word, because this is what was said by Joseph Schumpeter some 100 years ago. He said there are 4 significant requirements for a country to become a rich country. One is invention. Then the inventions will have to be commercially produced by entrepreneurs, which he called the innovation. Then that innovation should be, the knowledge should be spread among all the other manufacturers in the country, which he called the diffusion. Then it should be imitated by other people. So there are 4 items. One is the invention. The universities can do the invention. Who will do the innovation? That's the entrepreneurs. So let us build the link today. The diffusion, the university can do the diffusion, and also the entrepreneurs also can do the diffusion. Then imitation. So let us have, I mean, this, instead of giving this 10 million rupees to each school, let us give 10 million rupees to each school so that they will start a startup company and imitate whatever that has been produced by some other people. So this is a must if you want to become a rich country. It's not difficult. If we have the correct policies, I hope the Growth Lab will look into these things and come up with the proper strategies. And if they do so, we can become a rich country by 2048. But by 2048, I am not available here. So thank you.